Captain Hyunwoo Kim stood on the bridge of the New Seoul watching stars drift past the main viewer. The ship moved through space at a steady pace heading toward the Outer Rim territories. This was humanity's first real diplomatic mission beyond their home system, and Hyunwoo felt the weight of that responsibility on his shoulders. His crew of 37 humans represented their entire species to whatever they might find out here in the vast darkness between stars. Jisoo Park sat at her communication station, running her daily checks on the long-range sensors. The young officer had volunteered for this mission despite knowing they would be gone from Earth for at least 3 years. Her family had worried, but Jisoo wanted to be part of something bigger than herself. She wanted to help humanity take its first real steps into the greater galaxy. The signals she monitored came from dozens of different star systems, but most were just background noise or automated beacon transmissions. Taemin Lee worked in the engine room, keeping their fusion reactors running smoothly. The chief engineer had designed many of the ship's systems himself and knew every bolt and wire on the New Seoul. He was proud of human engineering and believed their technology could compete with anything they might encounter among the stars. His engines could push the ship faster than anything Earth had ever built before, and his weapons systems were based on the most advanced theories human scientists could develop. So Young Choi spent her days in the science lab studying everything they encountered. The xenobiologist had dreamed of meeting alien life since she was a child, reading about the possibility of other worlds. Her equipment could analyze any form of life they might discover, and her databases contained everything humanity knew about possible alien biology. She hoped to make first contact with a peaceful species that could teach humans about the wider universe. The crew had been traveling for 8 months without finding any signs of intelligent life. They had discovered several worlds with basic organisms and had cataloged dozens of different stellar phenomena, but nothing that suggested advanced civilization. Some of the crew were starting to wonder if they were alone in this part of the galaxy. The silence from other star systems was beginning to feel heavy and oppressive. Captain Kim was reviewing their planned route when Jisoo suddenly straightened at her station. Her instruments were picking up something unusual from a system about 12 light-years away. The signal was clearly artificial and seemed to be broadcasting on multiple frequencies at once. She adjusted her equipment to get a clearer reading and realized this was exactly what they had been hoping to find during their long journey through space. The transmission was coming from a system with 7 planets orbiting a yellow star very similar to Earth's sun. The signal strength suggested it was being broadcast with enormous power to reach across such vast distances. Jisoo began running the message through their translation computers while calling for Captain Kim to come look at her readings. This could be the first evidence of alien intelligence that humanity had ever encountered. Hyunwoo hurried to the communication station and looked over Jisoo's shoulder at the incoming data. The patterns were definitely artificial and seemed to contain complex mathematical relationships that suggested high intelligence. The translation computers were working to decode the message, but it would take time to understand an entirely alien language. He called for the rest of the senior staff to come to the bridge immediately. Taemin arrived from the engine room wiping grease from his hands while So-young came running from her lab carrying a tablet full of analysis equipment. Both officers gathered around the communication station as Jisoo continued working to clean up the signal. The message seemed to be repeating the same content over and over again, which suggested it might be some kind of distress call or automated beacon. The translation computer finally began producing recognizable words after cross-referencing the mathematical constants and universal physical principles embedded in the transmission. The message was indeed a distress call, and it painted a terrifying picture of what was happening in that distant star system. An alien species called the Velkari were under attack by another group called the Razak Swarm, and they were asking for help from anyone who might be listening. So-young read the translated message aloud to the gathered officers. The Velkari described themselves as a peaceful species that had never developed weapons of war. They lived in harmony with their planet and had spent centuries building beautiful cities and advancing their knowledge of science and art. The Razak had arrived in their system 3 months ago and had been systematically destroying everything the Velkari had built. The message explained that the Razak were a species that consumed entire worlds. They would strip a planet of all its resources and leave nothing but dead rock behind them. The Velkari had tried to negotiate with the invaders, but the Razak only understood conquest and domination. Now the Velkari were hiding in their last remaining city, while Razak forces prepared for a final assault that would destroy their entire civilization. The plea for help was being broadcast across hundreds of star systems in the desperate hope that some other species might be willing and able to intervene. The Velkari admitted they had no weapons to offer in trade and no resources that could pay for military assistance. They could only offer their gratitude and their friendship to anyone who might save them from extinction. Captain Kim felt his chest tighten as he listened to the message. These were people facing the complete destruction of their species and everything they had ever built. The message contained recordings of Velkari voices, including what sounded like children singing traditional songs. The translation computer could not capture the emotion in their alien voices, but somehow the desperation came through clearly enough. Taemin checked their current position and calculated the distance to the Velkari system. At maximum speed, they could reach the alien homeworld in about 18 hours. The chief engineer pointed out that they had no idea what kind of forces they might be facing, or whether their weapons would be effective against alien technology. This could be a suicide mission with no chance of success. Jisoo continued monitoring the transmission and reported that the signal was getting weaker. Either the Velkari were running out of power for their transmitters, or their equipment was being destroyed by the ongoing attack. The message now included a countdown showing they estimated 72 hours before their last defenses would fall, and their species would be wiped out completely. So Young analyzed what little information they had about both alien species. The Velkari seemed to be herbivorous based on their description of their agricultural cities and their complete lack of military technology. The Razak sounded like a typical predator species that had evolved to consume other forms of life. This appeared to be a classic case of a peaceful civilization being destroyed by aggressive conquerors. The bridge fell silent as the crew considered their options. They were just one small ship with a crew of 37 humans facing an unknown enemy that had already proven capable of conquering an entire star system. Their mission was supposed to be diplomatic contact with friendly aliens, not military intervention in an interstellar war. Nobody had prepared them for this kind of decision. Captain Kim walked to the main viewer and stared out at the stars while he thought about what to do. Somewhere out there, an entire species was about to be extinct, while their desperate calls for help echoed across empty space. Most civilizations were apparently ignoring the Velkari plea, or were too afraid of the Razak to get involved. Humanity might be the only hope these people had left. He turned back to his crew and saw the same thoughts reflected in their faces. They had joined this mission to represent the best of humanity to the galaxy. Now they had a chance to show what humans were really made of when innocent people needed help. The choice was obvious, even if the odds of success were almost zero. Hyunwoo Kim straightened his shoulders and looked each of his officers in the eye before giving the order that would change galactic history. The new soul changed course toward the Velkari system while Jisoo sent a response message back along the transmission path. Help was coming even if it might not be enough. The new soul dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velkari system and immediately activated all sensors. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The fourth planet from the star was covered in smoke and fire, with massive ships orbiting around it like hungry predators. Captain Kim counted over 200 alien vessels ranging from small fighters to enormous battleships that dwarfed his own ship. Hyunwoo ordered battle stations as they moved closer to get a better look at the situation. The Razak fleet was spread across the planet's orbit in a formation that suggested they were preparing for a final assault on whatever remained of Velkari civilization. The alien ships were dark and angular, with designs that looked more grown than built. They moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of a species that had perfected the art of planetary conquest. So Young worked frantically at her science station, analyzing the Razak technology and biological signatures. The readings were unlike anything in human databases, but she could tell these aliens were definitely organic, rather than mechanical. Their ship seemed to be partially alive with energy signatures that pulsed like heartbeats. The xenobiologist realized they were dealing with a species that had developed biotechnology far beyond human understanding. Taemin reported from engineering that their weapon systems were ready and their shields were at maximum power. The chief engineer had spent the journey to the Velkari system, modifying their armaments based on his best guesses about alien defensive technology. Human weapons were designed to fight other humans, so he had no idea whether plasma cannons and nuclear missiles would be effective against these strange organic ships. The surface of the Velkari homeworld showed signs of massive destruction, with entire continents burned black and dead. Only one area near the northern polar region still showed signs of life, and even that was shrinking as Razak forces continued their bombardment. Jisoo detected faint transmissions from that region, suggesting the last Velkari survivors were hiding in underground shelters, waiting for the final blow to fall. Captain Kim opened a communication channel to the Razak fleet, using standard mathematical principles and universal constants that should be recognizable to any intelligent species. The response came quickly in the form of harsh clicking sounds that the translation computer slowly converted into understandable speech. The voice that emerged was cold and filled with contempt for any species that dared to interfere with their conquest. War Prime Skextal identified himself as the leader of the Razak forces attacking this world. His message was simple and direct. Unknown species would withdraw immediately or be destroyed along with the Velkari. This planet and everything on it belonged to the Razak swarm by right of conquest. Any attempt to interfere would be met with overwhelming force that would reduce the human ship to cosmic dust. Hyunwoo listened to the translation with growing anger at the casual way this alien spoke of genocide. The War Prime described the Velkari as weak prey animals that deserved to be consumed because they lacked the strength to defend themselves. He boasted about how many worlds the Razak had stripped clean and how many species they had driven to extinction. This was clearly a civilization built entirely on conquest and destruction. The captain thought about the desperate message they had received from the Velkari, asking for help from anyone in the galaxy. He thought about the recordings of alien children singing their traditional songs while hiding from the monsters that wanted to destroy everything they had ever known. Most of all, he thought about what it meant to be human and what values his species wanted to represent among the stars. Captain Kim activated the main communication array and broadcast his response on all frequencies, so every ship in the system could hear his words. He identified himself as Captain Yunwoo Kim of the Human Defense Force representing the people of Earth. His message to War Prime Skextal was equally simple and direct. The Razak had 30 minutes to withdraw from this system, or face the consequences of their actions. The alien response was immediate laughter that sounded like breaking glass, mixed with the clicking of insect mandibles. Skextal found the idea of one small ship threatening his entire fleet to be the most amusing thing he had encountered in cycles of conquest. He invited the humans to look at the odds they were facing and reconsider their foolish statement before they were added to his collection of defeated enemies. So Young reported her analysis of the Razak technology to Captain Kim, and the news was both good and bad. The alien ships were definitely superior in terms of raw firepower, and their biotechnology gave them advantages that human engineering could not match. However, their weapons seemed to be designed for planetary bombardment rather than ship-to-ship combat, and their tactics suggested they relied on overwhelming numbers rather than individual skill. Taemin had been studying the energy signatures from the Razak fleet and made a startling discovery. These aliens had never encountered nuclear weapons or high-energy plasma technology. Their ships were designed to resist biological weapons and kinetic impacts, but showed no evidence of radiation shielding or electromagnetic hardening. Human technology might actually have advantages that the Razak had never needed to defend against. Jisoo established contact with the Velkari survivors, hiding in their underground shelters, and managed to speak directly with High Counselor Yathara. The alien leader sounded exhausted and defeated after months of watching her people die while their calls for help went unanswered across the galaxy. She could not believe that anyone had actually come to their aid, especially a species she had never heard of before. The High Counselor explained that the Velkari had tried everything they could think of to save themselves. They had offered to surrender their world and relocate to another planet, but the Razak wanted complete extinction, not just conquest. They had tried to fight back, but their peaceful society had never developed military technology, and their improvised weapons were useless against Razak biotechnology. Yathara described her people as farmers and artists who had spent their entire history building rather than destroying. The Velkari had created beautiful cities that worked in harmony with their planet's ecosystem, and had developed sciences focused on healing and growth rather than weapons and war. They had always believed that intelligence and compassion were the highest values any species could achieve. The 30-minute deadline Captain Kim had given the Razak was approaching, and War Prime Skextal had not withdrawn his forces. Instead, the alien commander had moved his fleet into an attack formation, clearly intending to demonstrate what happened to species that dared to challenge Razak's supremacy. Over 200 ships began converging on the lone human vessel while preparing their weapons for what they expected to be a very short battle. Hyunwoo gathered his senior staff on the bridge and looked each of them in the eye. They all knew the odds they were facing, and they all knew this would probably be the last decision any of them ever made. But they also knew that somewhere below them an entire species was counting on humanity to keep its word. The captain asked for volunteers to stay at their post during the coming battle, and every single crew member stepped forward. So Young reported that she had uploaded everything they had learned about both alien species to a secure transmission beacon that would automatically broadcast their findings back to Earth if the ship was destroyed. Future human explorers would at least know what had happened here, and might be able to use this information to avoid the same fate. Her scientific curiosity remained strong even in the face of almost certain death. Taemin announced that he had modified their fusion reactors to overload on command, turning the entire ship into a massive bomb if necessary. The chief engineer had no intention of letting the Razak capture human technology, and he wanted to make sure they paid a heavy price for attacking his ship. His weapon systems were loaded with every nuclear warhead and plasma charge they carried. Jisoo maintained communication links with both the Velkari survivors and Earth, so someone would have a record of what humanity had tried to accomplish here. The communications officer had also been broadcasting everything on emergency frequencies, hoping that other species in the galaxy might witness what was about to happen. She wanted the universe to see what humans were made of when innocent people needed help. The Razak fleet completed its attack formation, and War Prime Skextal sent one final message to the human ship. He expressed his disappointment that such an interesting new species had chosen to die for worthless prey animals instead of joining the Razak as conquerors. The alien commander promised to make their destruction quick as a reward for providing him with some entertainment before the final conquest of this world. Captain Kim stood in the center of his bridge surrounded by his crew and felt proud to be human. They were about to face impossible odds in defense of people they had never met before, simply because it was the right thing to do. This was what his species was capable of when faced with a choice between safety and doing what was right. He gave the order to engage, and the battle that would change galactic history began with one small ship charging into the darkness toward 200 alien warships. The first wave of Razak fighters swarmed toward the new soul like angry insects defending their hive. Captain Kim ordered evasive maneuvers while Taemin opened fire with their plasma cannon arrays. The human weapons cut through the alien ships, with devastating effectiveness as the superheated energy beams sliced through bioarmor that had never encountered such temperatures. Razak pilots screamed in their clicking language as their organic fighters dissolved around them. War Prime Skextal watched in shock as his advanced scouts were destroyed in seconds. The alien commander had expected the single human ship to be overwhelmed immediately, but instead he was seeing technology that defied everything he knew about galactic warfare. The energy signatures from the human weapons were unlike anything in Razak databases, and their effectiveness was far beyond what should be possible from such a small vessel. So Young worked frantically at her science station, analyzing the battle data and making a discovery that changed everything. The readings from human crew members showed stress patterns and adrenaline levels that would kill most known species, but the humans were not just surviving but actually fighting better under extreme pressure. She realized they were dealing with biological adaptations that marked humans as products of an extremely dangerous homeworld. The xenobiologist accessed the ship's databases and found the classification system used by galactic civilizations to rate planetary danger levels. Most species evolved on worlds rated between Class 1 and Class 5, with peaceful environments that encouraged cooperation and intellectual development. Earth registered as a Class 12 death world, where only the most aggressive and adaptable life forms could survive to develop intelligence. Taemin pushed the fusion reactors beyond their normal limits, while routing power to weapon systems that were never designed to fire continuously. The chief engineer had grown up on a world where natural disasters could kill millions, and wars had shaped human development for thousands of years. His engineering solutions reflected that heritage as he treated their ship like a weapon that existed to destroy enemies rather than simply explore space. The Razak battle formations began to shift as War Prime Skekstol realized he was not facing a typical galactic species. Human tactics were completely unlike anything the Razak had encountered in their centuries of conquest. Most civilizations fought defensively, trying to preserve their ships and minimize casualties, but the humans seemed to actively seek out the most dangerous parts of the battlefield. Jisoo broadcast the battle across all communication frequencies, so the entire galaxy could witness what was happening in the Valkyrie system. Her transmissions included tactical analysis and biological data about both humans and Razak that revealed crucial information about what made this battle different from normal galactic warfare. She wanted other species to understand that they were watching something unprecedented in galactic history. Captain Kim ordered a direct assault on the largest Razak battleship despite being outnumbered 200 to 1. The human commander had studied military history and knew that defeating enemy leadership could cause entire armies to collapse. His tactics were based on lessons learned from thousands of years of human warfare, where victory often went to whoever was willing to take the greatest risks. The new soul accelerated straight toward the Razak command ship while firing everything they had. Nuclear missiles armed with fusion warheads struck bioarmor that had never been designed to resist atomic weapons. The explosions tore massive holes in the alien vessel as radiation poisoned the organic systems that kept it alive. Razak warriors died by the hundreds as their ship began to dissolve around them. So-Young made another crucial discovery as she analyzed the ongoing battle. Humans were the first species the Razak had encountered that actually became more effective fighters when facing hopeless odds. Most galactic civilizations would surrender or retreat when faced with impossible situations, but human brain chemistry was designed to respond to extreme danger with increased aggression and clearer thinking. War Prime. Skekstol found himself facing an enemy that made no sense according to everything the Razak knew about warfare. The humans should have been terrified and confused by the overwhelming odds against them, but instead they seemed to be enjoying the challenge. Their combat patterns showed creativity and adaptability that suggested they had evolved specifically to fight against superior forces. Taemin reported that their primary weapons were running low on ammunition, but he had prepared alternatives that would shock even their own crew. The chief engineer had converted their cargo transporters into kinetic bombardment systems that could accelerate chunks of metal to near light speed. His improvised weapons could punch through any armor by using the ship's industrial equipment in ways it was never intended to be used. The Razak fleet tried to surround the human ship using standard tactics that had worked against every other species they had conquered. But Captain Kim anticipated their movements and used the planet's gravity well to execute maneuvers that should have been impossible for a ship of their size. His tactical training included lessons from naval warfare on Earth, where smaller vessels had often defeated larger fleets through superior positioning and timing. Jisoo established communication with Valkyrie survivors who were watching the battle from their underground shelters. High Counselor Yathara could not believe what she was seeing as a single alien ship fought against odds that should have guaranteed immediate defeat. The Valkyrie had never witnessed combat tactics like this and were beginning to understand that humans were very different from any species they had encountered. The battle reached a turning point when Captain Kim made a decision that horrified both allies and enemies. The new soul was critically damaged and surrounded by Razak ships that were preparing to board and capture human technology. Rather than surrender or attempt to escape, Hyunwoo ordered Taemin to initiate a controlled fusion reactor breach that would turn their ship into a massive bomb. The chief engineer had been preparing for this possibility since the battle began, and his preparations were far more extensive than anyone realized. Taemin had not just rigged the main reactor to explode, but had also prepared secondary charges throughout the ship that would maximize the damage to surrounding enemy vessels. His plan was to take as many Razak ships as possible with them when they died. So Young transmitted her final scientific analysis to the emergency beacon that would carry their discoveries back to Earth. The xenobiologist had documented everything about human advantages in combat and had identified weaknesses in Razak biotechnology that future defenders could exploit. Her data would help other species understand both the dangers and the potential that came with contact with a Deathworld species. War Prime Skextal realized too late what the humans intended to do and ordered his ships to retreat from the suicidal aliens. But the Razak commander had never dealt with enemies who were willing to die in order to take their attackers with them. His forces were positioned for capture and boarding operations, not for dealing with a massive nuclear explosion at point-blank range. The new Sol detonated with the force of a small star as its fusion reactors went critical, and the secondary charges amplified the explosion beyond anything the Razak had ever experienced. The blast destroyed 47 Razak ships outright and crippled dozens more as radiation and electromagnetic pulses shut down their organic systems. In seconds, the alien fleet had lost nearly a quarter of its strength to a single enemy vessel. Captain Kim and most of his crew survived the explosion in the ship's heavily armored command section, which had been designed to serve as an escape pod in extreme emergencies. Their sacrifice had been calculated to maximize damage to the enemy, while giving them a chance to survive and continue fighting. Even their apparent suicide had been planned with the tactical precision that marked humans as products of a violent world. The surviving Razak ships found themselves facing an enemy they did not understand and could not predict. Human tactics were based on warfare between equally intelligent opponents who had spent millennia developing increasingly sophisticated ways to kill each other. The Razak had never encountered a species that treated war as an art form, requiring creativity, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for victory. Jisoo continued broadcasting from the command pod as it fell toward the planet's surface. Her transmissions carried tactical data about human combat effectiveness and biological information that would help the galaxy understand what they had just witnessed. The communications officer wanted other species to know that somewhere in the darkness between stars, there was a race that would fight to the death for strangers. So Young analyzed the battle results and realized they had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. A single ship crewed by beings from a death world had crippled a fleet that had conquered dozens of star systems. The xenobiologist understood that this moment would change how every species in the galaxy viewed both humanity and the nature of warfare itself. The command pod crashed in the Velkari polar region near the underground shelters where the last survivors were hiding. The command pod had crashed through the ice and snow of the Velkari polar region, leaving Captain Kim and 8 surviving crew members stranded on the frozen surface of an alien world. Taemin worked to establish emergency power, while So Young checked their limited medical supplies and Jisoo tried to re-establish communication with the Velkari survivors. They had damaged the Razak fleet, but the enemy still had over 100 ships and would recover from the shock of losing so many vessels to a single opponent. High Counselor Yathara emerged from the underground shelters with a small group of Velkari to help the humans who had sacrificed everything to save her people. The alien leader was tall and graceful with blue-green skin and large eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. She moved carefully across the ice while her people carried medical equipment designed for their own biology, but willing to try helping the strange warriors who had come from the stars. The Velkari were unlike any species the humans had imagined during their journey through space. They seemed to glow with a soft inner light, and their voices created harmonious sounds, even when speaking in urgent whispers. So Young realized these aliens had evolved from plant-based organisms rather than animals, and their entire civilization was built around growth and nurturing rather than competition and conflict. Yathara spoke in her musical language while the translation computers worked to convert her words into something the humans could understand. She thanked them for their sacrifice and wanted to know why a species they had never met would risk everything to help strangers. The High Counselor had lived through the destruction of her entire world. and could not comprehend the kind of compassion that would drive beings to die for people they had never seen. Captain Kim explained through the translation system that humans believed intelligent life was precious and should be protected wherever it was found. His species had learned through bitter experience that allowing evil to triumph anywhere made the entire universe a darker and more dangerous place. The Velkari were artists and scientists who had spent their lives creating beauty and knowledge, and that made them worth saving regardless of what they could offer in return. Taemin reported that the damaged Razak fleet was regrouping in orbit and preparing for a final assault on the remaining Velkari settlements. The chief engineer estimated they had maybe 6 hours before the aliens recovered enough strength to complete their planetary bombardment. The human survivors had no ship and no weapons that could affect enemies in space, but they were still determined to find some way to continue fighting. Jisoo had been monitoring galactic communication frequencies and made a discovery that changed everything about their situation. The battle between the New Sol and the Razak fleet had been recorded by monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, and the recordings were spreading across civilized space faster than anyone had expected. For the first time in galactic history, other species were seeing what humans called warfare, and the psychological impact was enormous. The communications officer played back some of the transmissions she had intercepted from different alien civilizations. Most galactic species had never encountered anything like human combat tactics, and were struggling to understand how a single ship could damage a fleet through what appeared to be organized suicide. The concept of dying to protect strangers was so foreign to most aliens that they were having difficulty processing what they had witnessed. So Young worked with Velkari scientists to analyze the biological differences between their species and discovered something remarkable. Humans and Velkari had evolved completely different solutions to the problem of intelligence, but both species shared a capacity for what humans called empathy. The Velkari ability to understand and care about other forms of life was what had made them perfect targets for the Razak, but it was also what made them natural allies for humanity. High Counselor Yathara explained that her people had been sending distress calls across the galaxy for months, without receiving any response from the hundreds of civilizations that had the technology to help them. Most species considered the Velkari too weak to be worth saving, and were too afraid of the Razak to risk military intervention. Humanity was the first civilization that had chosen to help based on moral principles rather than practical calculations. The Velkari had recorded human combat techniques and were amazed by the creativity and adaptability their rescuers had shown during the battle. Yathara admitted that her people had never developed military technology, because they had never imagined that intelligence could be used to create more effective ways of killing. Human warfare represented a completely different approach to problem solving that the Velkari found both terrifying and fascinating. Captain Kim was studying tactical displays showing the current positions of Razak forces when Jisoo detected something approaching the system at incredible speed. Long-range sensors showed multiple ships traveling faster than anything in their databases and broadcasting human identification codes. Admiral Dong Hyun-yoon had received the emergency transmissions from the New Sol and was leading a rescue fleet toward the Velkari system. The human admiral had left Earth within hours of receiving the first reports about the battle and had pushed his ships beyond their normal limits to reach the Velkari homeworld. Admiral Yoon commanded 15 of humanity's most advanced warships crewed by volunteers who had demanded the right to help their fellow humans complete their mission. The rescue fleet represented nearly half of Earth's military strength, but no one had questioned the decision to risk everything. Taemin worked with Velkari engineers to establish communication with the approaching human fleet, and discovered that Admiral Yoon had brought more than just weapons and soldiers. The rescue ships carried medical supplies, food production equipment, and temporary shelters designed to support large refugee populations. The Admiral had come not just to fight the Razak, but to evacuate every surviving Velkari to safety. Warprime Skextal detected the approaching human fleet and realized that his easy conquest had become something completely different. The Razak commander had expected to face one isolated ship, but now found himself confronting an entire military force led by beings who had already proven they were willing to die fighting. The alien warrior was beginning to understand that humans represented a completely new type of threat, So Young analyzed the tactical situation and explained to High Counselor Yathara what the humans were planning to do. Admiral Yoon intended to establish a defensive perimeter around the planet, while transport ships evacuated every surviving Velkari to temporary colonies in human space. The operation would be the largest civilian rescue in galactic history and would require perfect coordination between two species that had just met each other. The Velkari had never attempted anything like a planetary evacuation and were amazed by the speed and efficiency with which the humans organized the massive undertaking. Captain Kim worked with Yathara to identify population centers and establish evacuation priorities, while Tae Min helped coordinate the technical aspects of moving millions of aliens to ships designed for human crews. Jisoo maintained communication links between the surface evacuation sites and the human fleet, while also broadcasting updates to the rest of the galaxy. Her transmissions showed other civilizations that humans were willing to commit enormous resources to save strangers and were capable of organizing complex operations under extreme pressure. The evacuation was becoming a demonstration of human capabilities that would change galactic politics forever. Admiral Yoon established contact with Captain Kim and expressed his pride in the crew of the New Soul for their courage and sacrifice. The Admiral confirmed that Earth had committed to protecting the Velkari people regardless of the cost, and that humanity would find them new worlds where they could rebuild their civilization. The rescue fleet had brought construction equipment and agricultural supplies to help establish permanent colonies. The first transport ships began landing near Velkari settlements, while human warships engaged Razak forces trying to interfere with the evacuation. Admiral Yoon had studied the battle recordings from the New Soul and had developed new tactics specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses Captain Kim had discovered in Razak biotechnology. Human weapons were proving even more effective when used by crews who understood their advantages. High Counselor Yathara worked with human logistics officers to coordinate the movement of her people, while trying to understand the scale of what their rescuers were attempting. The Velkari had never seen anything like human organizational capabilities, and were beginning to realize that their saviors were not just warriors, but also builders who could create solutions to problems that seemed impossible. So Young documented everything about Velkari culture and biology, while helping families prepare for evacuation to unknown worlds. The xenobiologist was determined to preserve as much as possible of Velkari civilization, even as their homeworld was being destroyed. Her work would help the refugees maintain their identity, while adapting to life among humans and other galactic species. The evacuation continued for 3 days, while human ships held off increasingly desperate Razak attacks. 6 months after the evacuation of the Velkari homeworld, Captain Kim stood in the gardens of New Veltos, watching human and alien children playing together under the light of a foreign sun. The refugee colony had grown from temporary shelters into a thriving settlement where two species were learning to build something neither could have created alone. The Velkari had brought their knowledge of biological sciences and sustainable agriculture, while humans had contributed engineering expertise and defensive technology. High Counselor Yathara walked beside Captain Kim through the growing city, where Velkari artists were creating sculptures that incorporated human mathematical principles, and human architects were designing buildings that worked in harmony with alien plant life. The partnership between their species had developed far beyond what anyone had expected when the desperate plea for help first reached the New Soul 8 months ago. So Young worked in the colony's research center where Velkari and human scientists were combining their knowledge to develop technologies that neither species could have imagined alone. The xenobiologist had become the unofficial ambassador between the two groups and had helped establish protocols for sharing information and resources. Her work was laying the foundation for future cooperation between humanity and other galactic civilizations. The success of New Veltos had attracted attention from across the galaxy, as other species tried to understand how two completely different civilizations could work together so effectively. Diplomatic missions from dozens of alien governments had visited the colony to study human Velkari cooperation, and many had requested similar partnerships with Earth. Humanity was becoming a major power in galactic politics despite having only one colony outside their home system. Admiral Yoon had been promoted to head of human foreign relations and was coordinating contact with alien species who wanted to establish trade agreements or defense pacts with Earth. The Admiral's rescue fleet had become the core of humanity's first interstellar navy, and his officers were training crews from friendly alien worlds in human combat tactics. The galaxy was learning that humans could be valuable allies as well as dangerous enemies. Taemin had been working with Velkari engineers to develop hybrid technologies that combined human mechanical expertise with alien biological sciences. The chief engineer was particularly excited about new propulsion systems that could grow and adapt like living organisms while maintaining the reliability and power that human designs required. Their collaborative work was producing innovations that exceeded what either species could achieve alone. The Galactic Council had requested a formal meeting with human and Velkari representatives to discuss the implications of their alliance for interstellar law and diplomacy. Most galactic civilizations had operated under the assumption that different species were too incompatible to work together effectively, but the success of New Veltos was forcing everyone to reconsider their basic assumptions about interstellar relations. Jisoo had become the primary communication specialist for human-alien contact and was developing translation protocols that could work with dozens of different languages and communication methods. Her work during the Velkari evacuation had established her reputation as someone who could help different species understand each other, even under the most difficult circumstances. Alien diplomats specifically requested her services for important negotiations. Captain Kim had been offered command of Earth's newest exploration ships, but had chosen to remain on New Veltos, helping to establish the colony and serving as an advisor to other species who wanted to develop similar cooperative relationships. His actions during the battle with the Razak had made him famous across the galaxy, but he preferred working directly with people rather than becoming a political symbol. The Razak swarm had withdrawn from Velkari space after losing nearly half their fleet to human forces, but War Prime Skextel had sent messages threatening to return with reinforcements. Intelligence reports suggested that the Razak were studying human combat techniques and developing countermeasures for the tactics that had proved so effective during the evacuation battle. The peace was temporary, and everyone knew that larger conflicts were coming. Other predatory species in the galaxy had taken notice of human military capabilities and were either seeking alliances or preparing for future confrontations. The balance of power that had existed for centuries was shifting as civilizations tried to decide whether humans represented an opportunity or a threat. Some alien governments were requesting human military advisors, while others were secretly building defenses against possible human expansion. High Counselor Yathara had been elected as the first non-human member of Earth's Colonial Council and was helping to establish policies for future human settlements and alien partnerships. Her unique perspective as someone who had experienced both the destruction of her homeworld and the salvation offered by human intervention made her an invaluable voice in discussions about interstellar ethics and responsibility. The gardens of New Veltos had become a symbol of what was possible when different species chose cooperation over conflict. Velkari plants grew alongside Earth flowers, while human and alien children learned each other's games and languages. The colony demonstrated that diversity could create strength rather than weakness when people were willing to work together toward common goals. So Young had documented thousands of examples of successful human-Velkari cooperation and was writing a comprehensive guide for other species interested in establishing similar partnerships. The xenobiologist believed that the alliance between humanity and the Velkari was just the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization, where different forms of intelligence could combine their strengths to solve problems that no single species could handle alone. Admiral Yoon received regular reports from exploration ships that had encountered other species in distress and were following the example set by Captain Kim and the crew of the New Soul. Human vessels were developing a reputation as the people to call when civilizations faced extinction or oppression. The galaxy was learning that humanity would respond to calls for help, even when there was no obvious benefit to Earth. The Galactic Council meeting was scheduled to take place on the neutral world of Kepler-7, where representatives from over 200 species would gather to discuss the changing nature of interstellar relations. Captain Kim and High Counselor Yathara had been chosen to present the Human-Velkari alliance as an example of what was possible when species chose friendship over fear. Timon had completed work on the new class of ships that would carry human Valkyrie, cruise to other star systems where they could offer assistance to species facing natural disasters or military threats. The vessels incorporated the best of both technologies and were designed specifically for rescue operations and humanitarian missions. They represented a new type of spacecraft built for helping rather than conquering. Jisoo was training the next generation of human diplomats and translators who would staff embassies and research stations throughout the galaxy. Her students included both humans and Valkyrie, who would work together to establish peaceful contact with other civilizations. The communication protocols she had developed were becoming the standard for first contact situations across known space. The success of New Veltos had inspired similar colony projects where humans were partnering with other refugee species who had been displaced by war or natural disasters. Earth's Colonial Council had approved funding for 12 additional settlements, where different combinations of species could experiment with cooperative living arrangements. Each colony was developing its own unique culture while maintaining connections to their homeworlds. Captain Kim stood in the central plaza of New Veltos during the celebration, marking the first anniversary of the colony's founding, and looked around at the mixture of human and alien families who had made this place their home. Children who had been born on this world were growing up bilingual and bicultural, with perspectives that neither species could have developed alone. They represented the future of galactic civilization. High Counselor Yethera addressed the crowd, in both Valkyrie harmonics and human speech, thanking everyone who had contributed to making New Veltos a success, and promising that their alliance would continue to grow stronger with each passing year. She spoke about the importance of protecting those who could not protect themselves, and about the responsibility that came with having the power to make a difference in the universe. The celebration continued late into the night with human music, and Valkyrie light displays creating a festival unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. As Captain Kim watched the festivities, he thought about the desperate message that had started everything, and realized that sometimes the most important moments in history began with someone simply choosing to help when help was needed. The stars above New Veltos shone down on a colony that had become proof that different species could not only coexist, but could create something beautiful together. The alliance between humanity and the Valkyrie had changed the galaxy forever by demonstrating that cooperation was possible, even between civilizations that had evolved on completely different types of worlds.